Turning now to the latest dire warning from climate scientists. A major new report warns that the world has only 3 more years before it uses up its carbon budget. That's essentially the amount of CO2 we can burn and still maintain the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That target set by the Paris Agreement is now almost certainly out of reach. For more, we can bring in Joeri Rogelj, a professor of climate science and policy at the Imperial College of London. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. First, can you talk just a bit about the highlights from this report and what struck you about it?
This report is actually an annual initiative of over 60 international climate scientists who update key indicators of global climate change, key indicators of where we stand in terms of the emissions that we are emitting and the effects of those emissions. The report found that last year, we again saw record high greenhouse gas emissions. And as a result, we also saw the concentrations of those greenhouse gases increasing in the atmosphere. This in turn causes global warming. Last year stood above 1.5 degrees in terms of temperatures above the pre-industrial period. But that's kind of a 1-year exceptionally high temperature. Underlying is a longer trend that currently stands at 1.36 degrees. With global warming increasing and coming closer to this 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement, also the amount of carbon dioxide that we can still emit decreases. Currently, we estimate the amount of carbon dioxide that we can still emit ever, while limiting warming to 1.5 is around 130 billion tons of carbon dioxide. Putting that in context, last year we emitted roughly 42 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So that makes for roughly 3 years at current emission rates of exhausting the 1.5 degree carbon budget.
So clearly it's too late then, isn't it? I mean, is that kind of the takeaway from this report?
We definitely have had too little action over the past years and the past decades to still confidently avoid the 1.5 degrees of global warming. The question is it's whether that's too late for climate action, and the answer there is, of course, no. Current policies, that means what is currently on the books in terms of actions that countries are actually implementing, still point towards 2.5 and 3 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. And that while we know that impacts will increase drastically once we exceed 1.5 degrees of global warming and towards 2. So it's really not too late to really avoid significantly further harm and damages to society.
We had, this 2015 climate deal in Paris. Nearly 200 countries agreed. What's happened since then? I mean, why aren't these goals being met? Who's responsible?
Yeah, so the Paris Agreement sets out a global temperature goal of limiting warming well below 2 degrees while pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5. And to achieve this, countries need to put forward every 5 years pledges that lay out how they will contribute to reaching this goal. Now, if we take all these pledges and we look at what they add up to, they would limit warming roughly to 1.7 degrees. So that is actually a quite good outcome. However, these pledges or promises are not necessarily yet put into action. And what we see is that if we look at the actual policies that are being implemented, global warming is still projected to increase well beyond 2 degrees. Who is to blame? This is a collective problem that needs a collective solution. But some countries have failed more in providing and contributing to this solution than others. In the international climate negotiation, it is typically and it's well established that countries that have a higher responsibility in terms of historical emissions, past emissions, and that also are richer, are in a better place to take the lead and reduce their emissions first. We have seen emission reductions in the EU, in the United Kingdom, in several developed parts of our global economy. However, those emission reductions have not yet been deep and and low enough. So what we are looking at here is really kind of a mixed message where it is clear that we have emitted too much greenhouse gas emissions over the past few decades. The Paris Agreement has made some progress, but this is clearly insufficient to achieve the most ambitious end of the targets set in it.
And so now, concretely, kind of what has to happen? I mean, is this something that needs to happen, like more to be done at the political level? Is it the actual enacting of policies that's causing the block, or kind of where's the problem coming from?
So at the level of the international agreement, the Paris Agreement, that still stands. I mean, the goal in the Paris Agreement is to pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5. Whether we are below, at, or above 1.5 degrees, the implications of that goal remain exactly the same. And that means that we need to stop putting climate pollution in the atmosphere. And that means we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And that in the near term, because this is a cumulative problem. Every ton of carbon dioxide that we add to the atmosphere that we don't avoid emitting adds to global warming permanently. And that's then also where the focus need to be. We have pledges. Countries are also invited to put forward new pledges this year under the Paris Agreement. These pledges need to be ambitious, but then, of course, countries need to walk the talk, and they need to translate these pledges and these emissions targets into policies that change the amount of energy we use in housing, that provide good and reliable and low carbon transport systems, and that change our energy system and our power system to produce reliable energy while not producing climate pollution.
And if we do get past that 1.5 degree target, I mean, say we get up to 1.7 degrees, as you were mentioning, or even beyond that, is there any hope of reversing it afterwards?
Physically, we understand that if we start taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere again, we expect global warming to reverse. And in all honesty, that is probably something that we will need to consider in the long term. However, being able to cool the planet again doesn't mean that we get back to the same planet. If an ecosystem dies back, if we lose all global coral reefs, if we lose alpine ecosystems because they have literally been pushed off the mountain, they won't be returning when we cool the planet again in roughly a century from now. So the focus really needs to be on avoiding global warming from increasing further and really avoiding near-term greenhouse gas emissions and reducing them as deeply as possible. I appreciate that this is probably sounds quite daunting in the current geopolitical context. At the same time, the physics of climate change that are well understood and that we can see play out now in the world around us, they are not to be negotiated with, and they will just progress, and climate damages will just be hitting us as if we are not reducing our greenhouse gas emissions sufficiently.
Hopefully more progress will be made at the next climate conference in November. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you again so much, Joeri Rogelj. Again, that's Joeri Rogelj, a professor of climate science and policy at the Imperial College of London. Time to take a quick break. Stay with us if you can. We'll be back with more news in just a moment.